Hi guys, so Charles Walker MP was interviewed by BBC Newsnight and he basically defended corruption. Corruption within the Conservative Party, corruption within Number 10. Boris Johnson's corruption. He's defending it here. And his defence is basically, well, the taxpayer didn't have to put their hand in their pocket. So that's okay. So it doesn't matter that someone, we don't know who, gave money to Boris Johnson to fix up his flat. Boris Johnson then later returned the money. It seems also that it's not very clear whether Boris Johnson returned the money or the party returned the money. But somebody gave money to Boris Johnson. Now, as I've said on numerous occasions, businessmen, businesswomen, corporate leaders, billionaires gave money to politicians for two reasons. One is to gain influence, and the other is to gain a favour. It's not generally the case that, not always the case, but generally it's not the case that a politician will receive money from a business person because they like their hair, or they like their style, or they like the way they talk. Generally, you give money to a politician as a form of investment for the future. You give them money, they will pay you back in some other way, somewhere down the road. So let's hear Charles Walker defend corruption.
Well, I have to say, I think the refurbishment of the flat is the least important issue that's being covered, because at the end of the day, it didn't cost the taxpayer a penny. Either the Prime Minister's paid for it or Tory party donors paid for it. I don't really care who paid for it, as long as...
I don't really care who paid for it. So you don't care that somebody gave money to the Prime Minister, obviously to gain favour with the Prime Minister or to get something back in return. He doesn't have a problem with that.
As my constituents didn't pay for it, so it's cost the taxpayer nothing.
Well,
the
to be fair,
taxpayers get irritated when they end up funding things. So I'm sorry,
they get irritated when they end up funding things. Does he not have a problem with the fact that Dido Harding received 37 or 39 billion pounds? This was a form of corruption. The government handed over billions of pounds to someone to run a test and trace system that did not work. Part of it was also run by Serco, a private company that has connections to the Conservative Party. He has no problem with that. Does he not understand that corruption, in the end, costs the taxpayer a lot of money? Because if there are entities that are able to get access to the government and win contracts without a proper tender process, then the taxpayer ends up paying more.
It's to me, I just think I just can't understand why you in the media are so obsessed by taxpayers not funding a redecoration.
See, Charles is pretending to be stupid here because he's trying to channel his stupidity, project it onto the public, so the public look at this and go, oh yeah, he's right, yeah. Why should we be so concerned if there's corruption? We didn't have to pay. Somebody else is paying for Boris Johnson's flat. But do people not understand, once again, that if somebody's paying for Boris Johnson's flat, Boris Johnson or the party or the government is doing something in return? And it's eventually costing the taxpayer more in the long term.
In the media, and Simon Case, who said there's going to be an inquiry into the money that was spent. From what we know, 30,000, which is the public allowance, of taxpayers' money was spent. That's fine. Then we understand that it was paid for possibly by a donor through CCHQ, and it was only latterly that the Prime Minister then paid that money back. One of your former colleagues, a former cabinet minister, described that as basic money laundering, the transfer of the money through the system in that way. So why is it not important?
But because it isn't. The taxpayer hasn't... Sorry,
Why does he not have a problem with this? Somebody, and we don't know who, it would be very nice to see, a name attached to this payment, this donation to Boris Johnson or to the Conservative Party. Who gave this money? And then we could perhaps understand why they gave this money. Charles Walker doesn't care about that. For him, corruption is normal. It's normal for people to donate money to the party and then for the party to do something in return.
I'm confused. Did the tax pay the 30,000?
We don't care about the taxpayer, you friggin' idiot. We're talking about corruption here. And I'm a bit disappointed that the journalist here from the BBC didn't ask this question. Charles, who gave this money? And if he says, I don't know and I don't care, then why don't you care that someone gave money to the party, gave money to Boris Johnson to fix up his flat? Why do you think they gave this money? What do you think they gave this money for? Do you think they're getting something in return? Is that not detrimental to democracy?
It was confusing, the question you put to me. Has the taxpayer paid the 30,000, or have they paid part of the 58,000 with Tory party donors picking up the rest, or the Prime Minister?
Once again, he's just glossing over the fact that Tory party donors gave money to Boris Johnson. He doesn't have a problem with that. I'm completely against the idea of donors. Parties should be publicly funded. There shouldn't be donors. There shouldn't be people pumping money into a political party. Because a political party is there to serve the public, to serve constituents. If one individual can come along and say, well, I'd like the party to go in this direction, here's a lorry load of money, then which way do you think the politicians will go? Will they listen to their constituents, or will they listen to the person who's dumped a load of cash in their bank account?
Minister, I'm not entirely sure what the issue is here. The fact of the matter is there was an allowance that may or may not have been spent, but the taxpayer's not out of pocket. So taxpayers are worried when they're paying for refurbishments. If they're not paying for refurbishments and private donors are, it tends to be of little concern to the taxpayer.
Once again, this is corruption. You'd have no problem with corruption. Once again, somebody gave money in order to get something in return. That's how politics works.
Be perfectly honest, despite what former cabinet ministers may or may not say.
And it doesn't worry you. I think we have confirmed that 30,000 of it, which was the allowance, was paid for by the taxpayer. We'll put that on one side.
Right, okay.
But it does suggest...
Which is allowable, yeah.
Of course, which does suggest unethical borrowing, though. I guess what I'm asking you...
Unethical borrowing, just call it as it is. It's corruption. Boris Johnson engaged in corruption. The Conservative Party engaged in corruption. A donor engaged in corruption. Now, unfortunately, the corruption is legal. It's legalized. It's not illegal to give money to a party in order to donate or to channel this money to a particular politician. Now, it is illegal to give a politician money directly. That's illegal. But it's not illegal actually to channel it through a party. Isn't that convenient? But at the end of the day, we're talking about corruption.
Is you will know how backbenchers are feeling. You've chaired the 1922 committee. You'll know about the texts from and with Dyson. You'll know about the reckless quotes about human life. You'll know about discussing the halting of an inquiry that could be embarrassing. Does none of that alarm you at all?
So, Emily, I've been on your programme, and you will know that I'm not a signed-up member of the Boris Johnson fan club. I've been often voting against my own government.
I've been often voting against my own government. Isn't it convenient that he votes against the government when it's not going to have any impact on him, but he votes with the government when he decides, well, it's convenient for me. So, for example, when it came to the crime bill, Charles Walker voted with the government. You know, it's someone who claims to be an advocate for personal freedoms.
But we are talking about a man that nearly killed himself last year while in office trying...
Boris Johnson nearly killed himself. Is this a joke? Is he really trolling now?
...to navigate this crisis. We're talking about a man who's delivered the most successful vaccine programme of any major developed country in the world.
How dare you say that? How friggin' dare you say that, Charles Walker? You're a charlatan, you're a crook, you're a liar, you're a cheat. How dare you say that Boris Johnson is the one who delivered the rollout of the vaccine? Boris Johnson did not. It was the NHS that did that. The NHS is the one that deserves praise, not Boris friggin' Johnson. Because if Boris Johnson was responsible, he would have handed it over to his crony friends like Dido Harding and those in Serco who have connections to the Conservative Party. That would have been what would happen, and it would have had the same result as test and trace, an absolute disaster. How dare you say that the NHS, how dare you say that the responsibility for the rollout of the vaccine is because of Boris Johnson? The layabout in number 10. The NHS did the hard work here, and unfortunately, politicians like you are trying to deflect the gratitude that they deserve and lump it onto the idiot that is in number 10.
We're talking about a man who bent over backwards to get ventilators made.
Bent over backwards. The lies just continually flow one into the other. Bent over backwards about ventilators. There was an opportunity to purchase, as part of the European procurement scheme, ventilators at the beginning of the crisis. Boris Johnson said, no, we don't want to be part of that. Companies said, we're going to provide ventilators for you. Boris Johnson said, no, we don't want you. We're going to instead focus on Dyson. And then how many ventilators did Mr. Dyson actually deliver? 0. That's not bending over backwards.
Can you imagine if we hadn't had the ventilators made, what you would be saying? So
I'm quite upset also with the BBC. Why aren't they stopping him and saying, wait a minute, you're talking absolute twaddle here. Why are you lying? Stop lying, Charles.
I'm sorry, I can't really understand. There are many things I can take issue with the Prime Minister about, but none of the things you've mentioned to me tonight are things that really I'm actually going to get too cross about.
I just suggest that a lot of the public would believe that you can do both. You know, you can be a Prime Minister with a successful vaccination programme and also be empathetic to loss of life and also not be open.
Because Boris Johnson is not. I have said in the past, I have tried to find humanity within Boris Johnson, but I was wrong. Boris Johnson has no humanity. I'm saying it clearly now because I thought there was maybe a gram of humanity within Boris Johnson. I thought that when he went into hospital and then came out, he would be a new man. He would have had a road to Damascus conversion. He would actually care about the NHS. He would care about the people who are suffering because of the pandemic. And he doesn't. He has demonstrated that he doesn't give a flying F about the public or about the NHS.
Open to accusations of cronyism or corruption. You can do both.
But look, at the end of the day, we needed ventilators.
So corruption is okay because we needed ventilators. But even if you're going to stand on that high ground and say, yes, look, we had to turn a blind eye to corruption because we needed ventilators, then why didn't you actually go with the procurement scheme? Why didn't you go with that if you needed ventilators? Why didn't you reach out to the companies who actually produce the ventilators instead of handing out contracts to your friends and cronies? You can't say we needed the ventilators so we just had to ignore the rules. No, your government took conscious decisions to give contracts to their friends and allies and donors and not focus on those who would actually produce ventilators or PPE or other materials necessary to deal with the pandemic.
We were short tens of thousands. He had to get them built. He did what any person would do. He said, right, get them built, and I don't care how we're going to do it, but we've got to get them built. That is not wrong in itself. He wanted to save lives. He actually put it...
I can't take any more of this. The video is almost over, but I can't take any more of this. This lie after lie after lie, this attempt to defend the indefensible, and the fact that the BBC just sit there and allow this charlatan and this liar to continue to pump out his lies and his crap without it being challenged in any way. Boris Johnson is not a hero. Boris Johnson is the opposite of a hero. Boris Johnson did not care about the public. Boris Johnson only cared about his party and about his position. You can see that in the way that he dealt with the pandemic, and you can see it with the way he dealt with Brexit. It's always been about Boris Johnson, putting Boris Johnson first and everyone else second, third or fourth. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?